And that, we're also bringing not just ourselves and our education and our work, but our families and our history. And then, as Zach said, I'm the token Muslim here. Look
Mhm.
at me and what I represent and who I am. And so there's a lot that we're coming into. And then that's one thing I appreciate is that as I mentioned, I just can't hide much. Back to being the terrible poker player, but um, and so I appreciate that Zach doesn't ask me to.
Mhm.
He never, and that when we're having this, it's almost that like he gives me space to even get teary-eyed
Mhm.
or talk about things or stumble through conversations because it's not an easy place to be. And if we're stumbling, we know how students and faculty and other people are feeling through this.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, I'm joined by Marium Mohiuddin and Dr. Zack Ritter, who have been leading workshops on healing across the divides of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. This is clearly so needed given what we are seeing in the world and on college campuses. I also hope that some of what they will share with us can bring us clarity in other areas where trauma, history, harm, anger, and hate may divide us. I'm really grateful for both of you being here for this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. This episode is sponsored by Routledge and Taylor and Francis. View their complete catalog of authoritative education titles at routledge.com/education. And this episode is also sponsored by Leadershape. Go to leadershape.org to learn how they can work with you to create a just, caring, and thriving world. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, author, and coach, helping higher ed leaders and organizations advance learning, leadership, and equity. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm usually broadcasting from my home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today, I'm in a different location in Colorado at the intersections of the ancestral and current homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Mariam and Zach, thank you so much for being here. Let's get to the conversation. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves a little bit more, and we're going to start with you, Mariam.
Great. Thank you for having us on today. So my name is Marium Mohiuddin, and you completely got my name right. Thank you. Um, I like to say that I'm a Texan, but I have to admit too that I'm a Canadian. I was born in Canada, raised in Texas, and now living in LA. I think it's important to mention those because it really explains who I am and how I've even come to this conversation and how much my background has shaped who I am. I'm first generation. My family's from Pakistan, and I've been in the communications industry for about 25 plus years. Started off as a journalist. Actually, I came to the newsroom 1 month before 9/11 happened, so that was very interesting in my
Wow.
development in my career and who I am as a Muslim American. And I guess I should say that too. I'm born and raised Muslim. My family is, I would say, a little bit more conservative, but extremely liberal as well. We live in this dichotomy of that. And I've been active in about 10 years ago. I did a fellowship, which I must give credit to, which is called New Ground, a Muslim Jewish Partnership for Change, which has essentially just changed my life. And
Mm.
I started doing a lot of Muslim Jewish dialogue from there. And it's been about a decade working in this space and really being able to train under so many different leaders and rabbis and imams to come to where I am today. And not hoping that anything like this would ever happen. I am thankful that I can be part of this conversation and hopefully bring any kind of ease to anybody that's hurting right now.
I love it. And I think one of the themes that I've been thinking a lot about is how we break free from either or binaries and embrace the both and complexity. And your intro just did that. Canadian, Texas, Pakistan, LA, a family that is both conservative and also liberal at the same time. So I think that's really great. Zach, tell us a little bit more about you.
Hey everybody, so happy to be here. Thank you. It's an honor. Zack Ritter, he, him, his. I am from LA. My father was born in a refugee camp in Bavaria, in Germany. And that's where you get Bavarian Motor Works, BMW. And so we'll get into that. But growing up, the shadow of the Holocaust was always ever present in my upbringing, and just like what humans can do to each other in a very terrible way. And then what we can do to help be liberatory towards each other, I think, is also the lesson there. My grandparents were in Auschwitz, from Poland and Austria. And so I got really interested in learning about history in Europe and learning about histories of the world, and then the intersections of how the Jewish Holocaust intersects with the Black Holocaust, Native American Holocaust, and learning about these histories so that we can do the kind of the Jesse Jackson Rainbow Coalition thing of moving forward together in a progressive way. The last, I don't know, I'm getting old, but the last like 12 years, I've been in a mixture of higher education, doing DEIJ work, being a part-time professor at UCLA, at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Currently, I serve as a senior diversity officer at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And I also did a couple of years in Jewish nonprofits. And I'm also a product of New Ground. So yes, shout out to New Ground, who brought Mariam and I together and connected me with Muslim and Jewish friends that I'm not sure I'd ever connect with if not for them. And what brought me to that work was also a love story. And I was in love with someone who was East African and Muslim. And she was like, well, if we ever get married, I want you to say the Shahada. And I had no idea what that was. And so I needed to learn, and I needed to be with folks to grow my knowledge of different cultures and religions. So that's a little bit of who I am, and I'm sure more will be revealed about ourselves as we go on.
Yeah, and more both and as you share your story, and you're reminding me of Valerie Kaur talking about, I spent my first 20 years organizing around hate. I want to spend the next 20 years organizing around love. And sort of your entry into this being a love story is really wonderful. Well, let's get all of us on the screen here together and talk about this. We've been wanting to do some things on this particular topic and sort of around this topic in connection to other things, and really trying to figure out the right way to do it, to offer healing and dialogue and understanding and complexity. And so really glad to connect with both of you. And I think your intros show exactly why. Super recently, like you both said, you've been doing this for a long time. Super recently, you've both been leading workshops together around this topic, in addition to the more broad work you've been doing for decades. What are you learning? What is really coming up for you about bridging divides between Jews and Muslims right here, right now?
So I was talking to my younger sister last night. She's a therapist. I feel like I turned to her because I just was down and I couldn't explain it. And we were just talking about the presentation that we just did recently. And one thing she just said is that, presentations take a lot out of people, because you're having to have this conversation, especially this conversation, and be active and on, while still things might be triggering you along the way. And this conversation is really complex, and it's not simple, and the feelings and emotions around it are not simple. And you don't have your good days and your bad days. And there's nothing bad that happened in our presentation. It's just that the conversation is just hard, and a part of it just seems, well, a part of it is just really sad. And I'm much more of an intuitive person, so it really just has been affecting me recently. But that's one of the things I find the hardest, is that you're absorbing so much emotion from other people, and having to hold that space for them to be able to ask questions, and for you to be able to provide clarity and neutrality, or have you seen it from this point of view? And that can get hard, because it's a conflict, and you need confrontation, even when saying, have you considered it from this point of view?
Yes to all that. It's not easy, and I found myself the other day when Mariam and I were presenting at a college, like I was just feeling it in my body, and nothing particularly bad happened, but it just brought up a lot of emotions of negative things from the past, and I was thinking about when I was presenting at a church, and this I was talking about like the Holocaust, and this German national came up to me afterwards and was like really challenging me, and was like talking about numbers of how many people were actually killed in the camps and the showers and things like this. And it just was like, whoa, this is the stuff I hear about on TV about Holocaust deniers, and like here it is in my face, and like, but I can't lose my composure, because then I'm gonna look like some angry Jewish guy who came to this, church that's not my community, and then I popped off on this person. So there's a lot of politics around being Muslim in America. There's a lot of politics around being Jewish in America, and I think, the recent war, that broke out October 7th, it has made things very, very polarized on social media, obviously on college campuses. And I think it's also dug up a lot of trauma, PTSD, things within our bodies that we knew were kind of there. I don't know if we really wanted to be confronted with it all at once, but here we are. And I know we're going to get into it, but like Mariam said, holding people's pain while also trying to pretend to kind of put your own pain aside is a difficult proposition.
A couple of themes that I'm hearing, which I think are relevant to this and so many other things, but a lot of times I think when we talk about social change, we talk about changing others or changing the world or changing, and it always begins with self, right? It begins with changing yourself. And you're both pointing towards some of the self work to do that you've done to be able to be there and not have your emotions, but hold them for now, tend to them in another space so you can be here for the emotions of those, which takes a lot of self-awareness, right? Noticing, in my body, I am really feeling this, and then self-management to say, but my job is to be the facilitator of other people's learning in this moment. And then how are you going to tend to that in other places, right?
Yeah, I'm going to let Mariam jump in, but just as you're speaking, it jumps into my mind of, I was reading Gracie Lee Boggs' book, and she's for those that don't know, she's a very famous activist, Chinese-American activist who married a Black man, and they were activists together in Detroit. And she has this great saying where she's like, now is the time to transform our souls. And if we don't transform ourselves and our souls, then how are we going to transform our society? And she's talking about like, abolition and voting and changing housing rights and education rights for Black folks in Detroit. I'm also thinking, as you're saying this, something that my girlfriend tells me sometimes when we are in conflict. Hey, you're kind of dissociating. You're not here. Hey. And I think I've been in so many situations where there's such strong emotion from student, staff, or faculty that reminds me of like my childhood, right? Of growing up in a family where there was a Holocaust survivor who didn't know how to regulate her emotions, and she would just yell and she would be like really mean towards people. But it was confusing because she'd also be like really nice the next moment, and she'd be like, you know, caressing your arm and, oh, Zachary, I love you so much, love you so much. So it was this kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde stuff, which I also see unfortunately play out in academia and in student affairs. But I think growing up in a household with people with strong emotions, with a lot of trauma, and then me being the youngest in the family, trying to do shuttle diplomacy, trying to soothe people's souls, trying to like be the healer and the funny guy to get levity in the room. Yeah. Those skills, I mean, whatever. Yeah, I got like a master's and PhD and all those technical things. That didn't really, you know, sorry, my PhD teachers, love you, but that didn't really teach me the skills to do this work. It was growing up in that household and balancing people's emotions and trauma that helped me do this work.
Well, I think one of the ways that we disassociate is make it an intellectual activity, make it about history, make it about terms, make it about this. And I think that's where student affairs folks can really inhabit that gap. I think there's a lot of usefulness in talking about this in courses, and some of them might tap into the emotional aspect, but I think a lot of times we want to avoid the emotions because I'm uncomfortable with yours and I'm uncomfortable with mine. And so let's just keep it objective and keep it factual. But how do we allow for the emotions in a way? Because I think denying them doesn't help, but also letting them run rampant. But how do we allow for them and see what they can offer and tap into that healing and that connection?
I feel like I'm
very skillful.
I was gonna say, I feel like I'm the opposite of this. I am a very emotional person. And I grew up very short-tempered and angry, and just emotions always present. That's how my family was. What was there is what you read in our faces. You can still pretty much read it. I'm a terrible poker player. But over the years, I've learned that like it was getting me nowhere, and how miserable I was and how much I was pushing people away. So I really put the work in to change. And I am very self-aware, and I think that change has helped me be okay with and be okay with emotion, like, and have it be present, because I do strongly believe, like, when you intellectualize or you just keep it so fact-based, I can see how people manipulate conversations, and especially when someone's emotional, how people's emotions can be manipulated. And I'm such a strong social justice advocate that I can't even have unjust conversations because of how much it drives me crazy when I see those who can hold a temper or keep steady or be intellectual. They can use that almost as a manipulating thing. And I can't. I'd rather have someone cry, yell, scream, and let's just work through it than the other way.
I think it's an important distinction too, when we're doing that with genuineness and realness rather than disingenuous to be manipulative or to change the conversation or do things or avoid this and focus on that. But fostering that can be a real, it can open up possibilities.
I was gonna say, I think emotions are so, like, so something happened recently where Zach and I were presenting, and some questions were being asked of me, and I can't even explain, but it was the emotions in the room and the what I was reading off of the presenter, and it was so mixing in my brain, and I didn't know I couldn't make my way through. But I'm so thankful because Zach was there to be my partner in this conversation, and he just whispered to me, "You don't have to answer that question," and it provided such clarity for me. But I was also thankful that my emotions were there because it was giving me, like, it was like spidey senses going off, like there was something wrong in this conversation, there's a different agenda kind of here. So what I'm getting at is that I think emotions, especially in this conversation, are important, and for people to feel them and then be ready to have the discussion if they can. And because I think those emotions they're so strong right now in this context, and that if we were to squish them down, then we're harming ourselves in that process.
Dehumanizing ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that moment, because I'm such an empath, and I know you are as well, but I could feel your like your like ickiness towards this individual, and as the words came out of that person's mouth, I was like, oh no, that's not a good thing to ask. And yeah, I mean, you're my friend, you're my colleague. We've known each other for, I don't know, what, 6, 7+ years now. And I was just like, I don't know, I kind of felt like I wanted to defend my friend, and so but I didn't want to make it a big deal in front of the audience. And so I just like whispered to you, like, hey, that's like, that's like a personal thing. Like, you don't have to bare your soul to these folks, right? And a lot of this work can sometimes feel like, I am the Jewish person on display. I am the Muslim person on display, and ask me anything you want. And it gets offensive, and there's right gender dynamics, and there's racial dynamics, and we in our planning meetings, Mariam is like, I'm like, hey, do you want to take this section? Do you want to take this section? And Mariam is like, as a male, as a light-skinned, like white presenting Jewish guy, you probably have more latitude. You should say this part. It's going to be received better if you say it. And these are, unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and these are the politics that we live in. And I think Mariam and I's goal in these educational sessions, with a lot of stuff on the line, right? These institutions invite us, and like, oh my gosh, the elephant in the room, like, don't talk about Gaza, don't, what about this? What about this? You're going to offend this, we're going to offend this constituency. I think we are trying to bring education, bring some of that healthy emotional abundance, and not to be afraid of our emotions, because let's be honest, higher education institutions have become very money-driven and very prestige-driven. And so when we're talking about money and prestige, emotions and feelings are messy and dangerous and could lose us money.
Or media attention, or social media attention, or
we don't want to end up on the front page of the LA Times or whatnot. So I think how do we talk about these issues of mass death and terrible histories of death in a nice way? You can't, right? It's going to get messy. And so how do we get messy without dehumanizing each other?
Right.
And I think that's one of the things too, is that we do get messy, and we are honest, and you have to be, because it's not even authenticity, but we're showing that we're struggling through this too. And
it's role modeling.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're just not even modeling, oh, look at how we can communicate and work together. We're also modeling that we're having a tough time through, and what we had to do to even compromise to bring this presentation here. And that, we're also bringing not just ourselves and our education and our work, but our families and our history. And then, as Zach said, hey, I'm the token Muslim here. Look at me and what I represent and who I am. And so there's a lot that we're coming into. And then that's one thing I appreciate, is that as I mentioned, I just can't hide much, back to being the terrible poker player. But, and so I appreciate that Zach doesn't ask me to. He never, and that when we're having this, it's almost that like he gives me space to even get teary-eyed or talk about things or stumble through conversations, because it's not an easy place to be. And if we're stumbling, we know how students and faculty and other people are feeling through this.
Yeah. So 3 things that I want to highlight listening to you is, co-facilitation is really important, right? So you have just a little bit of moment, a little bit, that support, but also I can step away for a little bit, recover, manage some of those things. And then I also heard the sort of intersectional analysis, right? What are all of the other, we might be talking about Jews and Muslims, we might be talking about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and what else are at play? What are the gender? What are the racial implications? What's all going on here? And then being strategic about that, right? So given the reality of us, our identities, how we're read, the world, the pressure on college campuses, the news, the fact that someone's videoing in the back, how do we take, all that reality and say, how do we want to strategically move forward so we can be as effective as possible? I've talked with several senior student affairs officers who have said, we just don't feel equipped to lead this conversation on our campus. And our DEI folks don't feel equipped to lead this conversation. I don't feel equipped to lead this conversation. And we worry if we have it and we're not equipped, it might do more harm than good. And so we're not having it. And that feels terrible. And it's not where we want to be. And we're really struggling. So I just wonder, before we move on, what else would you offer? What have you learned that's maybe helpful for folks who feel like, I'm not equipped to do this? What might you offer them that might be helpful for them?
There's a couple of things that I can say and that come to mind. One is that I've been in communications for a while, and the one thing I try to tell any of my clients or whoever I'm working with is communicate. Communicate, over communicate, and communicate again. Because when you don't address the elephant in the room, you're actually making the elephant bigger, and people are going to look at it even more. So I know that people feel like, oh, well, we're just not going to have the conversation. And that's actually worse than trying to at least tackle, or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and to just have small nuggets of conversation. Or just even saying like, I don't know, but we're going to gather in this space. Or having different groups come together, or tackling it in different ways. It doesn't have to be completely so head on. We're going to take it all on, answer all the questions. We're going to come back and have a solution and solve, bring peace to the Middle East. Like, no one's asking for that. What people are asking for is to be seen and to be heard. And that's really is that simple. And so I feel like that, to me, is such an important thing, is just have the conversation. However small or big you do it, have it. And I think something that I just mentioned before too is that be honest about what you do and what you don't know. And I feel like it's okay to walk into a group and say, I don't know this. Whenever I'm coaching a client about interviews with the media, and I even say, if the media asks you questions and you don't know the answer, it is okay to say, I don't know that answer. I will get back to you. And that is a completely legitimate response.
Yeah.
Or to say, I don't know this, I do know this. And I feel like that also plays out in these kind of presentations.
Yeah, it can feel like you're losing credibility, but when I do it, but when I hear other people do it, it gains credibility, right? When they say, I'm not sure about that, but what I do know, I'm just like, oh, you're so wise.
I mean, I think administrators, staff, faculty, and students, you can bring experts to the campus to do presentations and to do long-term coaching and to do long-term education around these things. And, Mariam and I are currently doing that, which is powerful work. But before you bring, content expert folks, I don't know, whatever, that's a strong word. I don't know if I'm an expert, but we know some stuff and
yeah. Well, and process, there's content and there's process.
Correct. I think it's okay for institutions to have trauma-informed healing spaces and having gatherings where people come and they talk about what they're seeing on social media, how many of their family members have been killed in this conflict, how many family members are being held hostage or are in prison, in Israel. just because people's, going back to emotions, just because people's emotions are put out there in a healing session, in a listening session, doesn't mean that it's scary and bad and is going to lose the institution money, or someone might take out a flag from a country and say, you know, free Palestine, or someone might say, you know, wear an IDF, Israel Defense Forces shirt. And that's not the end of the world. That on a college campus, aren't we supposed to be a marketplace of ideas where people are supposed to talk about things and disagree and collegiately have conflict about these issues? I think we're so afraid of having healthy conflict that sometimes we are hiding behind screens and fighting each other there. But we know social media on this, on college campuses especially, smashes people down into two-dimensional people. And oh, I saw they posted this thing, they're dead to me. Mm-hmm. Where do we have the healthy spaces, places on college campuses where people can mess up and say something that they're trying out, that their identity as a Jewish person, as a Christian person, as a Muslim person, as a, you know, as a person of good faith coming to this, we need to create spaces where students can figure out who they are. And if we just, if we, I'm going to say two things here. If we shut people down, they may not be saying it, but that anger or whatever is going to keep growing in them. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, Loretta Ross, who created the reproductive justice movement, when she talks about calling people out, but rather calling them in, I think is really important, because in front of a whole audience, if you are publicly shamed as you are the bad person, rather than your statement or your idea was problematic and like, let's think about this in a different way, you can call someone in, and then the learning journey begins of, ooh, I didn't know that when I say that, it hits you like this. And also there's a political, financial aspect to what students are saying of, I don't want to be complicit in the killing of other people in the Middle East. And I am really upset at XYZ University for having investments in these missile and bomb companies, and I want you to divest yesterday. And that's where it gets really sticky and complicated, because institutions are run on finances. And so when you start critiquing the finance of an institution, then institutions start getting scared. But this is nothing new. We saw this in the Vietnam War era. We saw this in the Bush, Iraq, Afghanistan wars. Mm-hmm. This is nothing new. And so I think these institutions still haven't gotten maybe equipped to deal with this type of critique.
Well, we've talked about the bridging between Jews and Muslims, and this isn't just about Israel and Gaza. It's also about what's happening here in the US on college campuses and power and oppression and religious oppression. I'd love for the two of you to talk a little bit about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and what you're seeing, what you're noticing. How are they similar? How are they different? Because I think it's not just about difference. There's also power and oppression playing out in similar and different ways.
I'm trying to think. That's a big question. That's one of the reasons that we're doing this conversation, or we even started this conversation, was because I'm not going to solve the issues in the Middle East. I wish I could. And I can go out and protest and all of that, which I've done most of my life. And then it just seemed like, well, this is the one place that I can make a difference, because it's what's happening in my home and on my homeland, where I want to make sure what I've experienced growing up doesn't continue to happen to my nieces and nephews. I don't have any children, but and to the future and to the next generation of Muslim Americans that are out there. I mentioned that I started working. Well, so let me back up a little bit too. And that I came to America when I was 12. So it was the start of the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. So I just feel like since I've gotten here, it's just been this constant onslaught against Muslim Americans, right? So then you have the Gulf Wars, then you have so many movies that just depicted us as terrorists, and we had a certain look, and then there was and then of course 9/11, and
Yeah.
Zach mentioned some of the Bush era policies that came out, like from NCERS to the Patriot Act to even the formation of the DHS. But so our thought was that one thing that we know is that the rise of xenophobia in one group creates a rise in other groups. So as you're seeing this rise, we are legitimately seeing Muslims being attacked physically in their office spaces, how they're speaking with their coworkers or on campus, what they're publishing, not publishing. And so this is my small, feeble, maybe big, huge, I don't know, attempt at trying to provide some kind of discourse, or even making someone say, so if they're wearing a keffiyeh, what does that mean? My cousin was just telling me that a student was beat up in Austin and he was wearing a keffiyeh. And like, what does that shawl mean? Like, why did that happen? Why didn't someone step in? Can I help have that conversation so that people know when wearing that, it doesn't mean that you're anti-Semitic. It means that you're proud of Palestine and the Palestinian people. But yeah.
I think we don't, how do I put this? We're not good at going beyond the binary, even in terms of LGBTQ plus issues, right? So
or anything.
Or anything,
Ever.
right. And so I think what mine is saying, I'm agreeing with, like, just because I wear this keffiyeh doesn't mean I hate XYZ group or I want death to XYZ group. Picking up on Mariam's thread, we know the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, reports that anti-Semitism rates have gone up, reporting has gone up 388% since October 7th. We also know that CARE, the Muslim American group,
Islamic relations, yeah.
Indicates that since October 7th, Islamophobic hate crimes incidences have gone up 300%. So we all know that both of these communities are facing violent attacks on their bodies, verbal hatred, and otherwise, right? And I think we also have to remember what it means to be in a brown body in this country, right? To be in a Black or brown body, there's already a visible hatred target on you because of the genocidal history and slavery history of this country. I am able, in most places, well, in LA and New York and other places, I don't feel as comfortable, but like, if I am not wearing a yarmulke, I'm not wearing a Jewish star, I can pass. Now if there's really good haters, sometimes there's really good haters, and they say, oh, I could tell, his nose and his 5 o'clock shadow and all this stuff, this is a Jew. And I've had that. I've had that in when I was on vacation with my brother. This guy came up to us and said, I know who you two are, and you're Jewish, and I've come here to kill you, and I know what you've done in history. And we got in a fight, and it was a whole production. It was terrible. So I think I can hide more so than a Muslim person who's in a Black or brown body. There's also white Muslims. I understand this. And I think I have to challenge some of my own internalized anti-Semitism, because sometimes when I hear complaints, reports from some of the people in my circle that's anti-Semitic, some of it is really anti-Semitic. But just because someone critiques Israel, or just because someone is waving a Palestinian flag or saying, hey, Netanyahu, we charge you with genocide. You may not agree with that statement, but critiquing the leader of a country is not inherently, in my opinion, anti-Semitic. And we can get into the IRA definition and all that. That's contested. But with all that said, as a professional, I want to hold space for everybody, even with opinions that I deeply disagree with, even from my own community, right? Jewish identifying folks. And I was talking to someone who was pro-Palestinian, and they were saying some things that were really hard for me to hear. They were saying that the people that were dancing in the desert on that day deserve to die, because why are they dancing so close to the Gaza border, and shouldn't they have known? And isn't that amazing that the paragliders were gliding in and machine gunning people because it's so innovative in the way that they attacked Israel. And so some of these things, I need to hold space for it and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. And before I verbally attack them or whatever, I need to hear and understand where they're coming from, and then I can start gently pushing back. But I think our culture is so ingrained in, if you don't immediately shut someone down on social media, if you don't shut someone down in person, that you are a sellout, you are not, an anti-racist, and that you're part of the problem. You are perpetuating the killing.
Right. You're not whatever enough, right? You're not.
No, I was gonna say, one thing you asked about was the history of the two groups, and so I wanted to comment on that, because that's one of the things that led me in this direction and wanted to be involved with Muslim-Jewish relations, was because when I began to learn more about Judaism, one thing was I had to confront was my own internal anti-Semitism, and then began to see how much of what I believed and being a Muslim was so similar to who Jews are and what they believe. And just that there was this, so it was interesting. There was just like one small incident that happened when I had asked somebody, like, well, what do you do on Christmas? And they had mentioned, like, oh, I hate Christmas Day. There's nothing to do. And I said, growing up in the 80s and 90s, pre-internet and pre-streaming channels, there's nothing on TV that day and nothing was open. I hated Christmas Day because it was just, I just felt so like everybody else was doing something special. And I was alone and we were doing nothing. But what I'm getting at is that I found a Jewish friend who had the same feeling. And it was such a deep feeling because it was from my childhood that I felt absolutely connected. And I think these two communities have been connected for so long, and yet are now being pitted against one another. And I think it's advantageous to have us pitted against one another instead of having us work together. And but there's so much more commonality. And when we were doing this presentation that we referenced a little while ago, someone kept mentioning Judeo-Christian. And finally, I just stopped and I said, can we please stop using this term? Because this term has nothing to do with Judaism and Christianity and the similarity between the two. It actually is a lot to do with Christianity dominating. And the thing is that there's also a truth of the three religions being Abrahamic, and we've established that. So why do we keep turning to these two together? This one's over here. Like, why not just bring them all together and have this presentation? And the speaker when I commented on this, he got so offended, and I was like, you don't even understand what I'm trying to say. It's not about you. It's about how we've been tricked into like even using this terminology, which is breaking us apart even further, when we actually are so aligned. And my mom loves talking about just how, well, back in the day, Muslims and Jews, we got along and we lived so peacefully together. And it's like, okay, mommy, yes, no, I know. When you look at like even things like I mean, the Spanish Inquisition was against both of us.
Mhm.
Terrible reference, but I was just recently in Spain, and my tour guide was like, "Oh, this is where Muslims and Jews were killed," and we just kind of turned and we looked at this church and we're like, "Okay." Like it
Yeah,
just was such a
yeah,
weird feeling, but there is this long history of being together. Right?
yeah. I love that commonality across difference, right? Which doesn't mean they're the same, but that there is also commonality in the difference, and religious and cultural differences, and racial and ethnic differences, and differences in experience, oppression. The thing that the two of you remind me is from another religion, sort of a Buddhist maxim of notice your reactivity, and then how do you get to a place where you can choose a response, right?
Mhm.
So when I hear this, I want to be reactive, and
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
my flash, my trigger, my get back at them. All right, and how do
Mm.
I take a breath, respond tomorrow, don't respond, so that I can choose a response in alignment with my values and who I want to be. um,
There's actually a
I,
saying that if you're like confronted in an angry conversation and you're both standing, like you should sit down. And then
mm,
if you're still angry, go lie down.
yeah,
And the idea is to break that.
yeah,
We're talking about like removing yourself and taking a breath.
yeah.
So I completely agree.
Yeah, I think Zach mentioned earlier, people are afraid of healthy conflict. I'm not afraid of healthy conflict. I'm afraid of messing up. I'm afraid of getting it wrong. I'm
Mm.
afraid of stepping in it, and the criticism, not of what I said, but of who I am, right? And that's the difference between guilt and shame. And I think that's really powerful. Well, we knew this wouldn't be enough time. We're running out of time. I want to move us toward our closing question. The podcast is called Student Affairs Now. We always like to end by asking, what are you thinking, troubling, or pondering now? So just feel free to share with folks anything you want to add on this topic, or maybe there's something else that you really is present with you today. And then if folks want to connect with you, where might they best be able to do that? Mariam, we're going to start with you.
Sure. So I mentioned that I was speaking to my sister about this, and my sisters and I have an older sister as well. We talk about this a lot, and just because we're all facing this in different ways. My younger sister being a therapist, my older sister being an educator, and me being a communicator. And one thing that I keep remembering and we keep reminding ourselves is that we've been taught different ways to have a conversation with different groups, and acceptance and conflict resolution. And so why can't that be brought into this conversation? Why does it automatically get turned off? And like the benefit of the doubt that we've given people in conversation. My aunt likes to mention this a hadith, a saying in Islam about if you should give someone 700 reasons why, excuses, and the last excuse should be, I can't think of enough excuses. And so she's always mentioning that, and it's kind of like, and I'm not talking about giving excuses for this conversation, but trying to see that other perspective. And I'm so thankful that I am in a family that I can bring something up and people will be like, okay, let's think this through. But I say all of this to say that this is such a complicated issue with complicated feelings, and that so many of us are at different stages and levels, and it's okay. And if you are backing away from a friendship or a relationship in the short term, it could come back in the long term. And it's okay to do that because it is that difficult. And that I just hope that people can just pause to say, wonder what the other side might be thinking. Anyways, I don't want to take more time, but you can also find me on pretty much any social media platform. I'm a communications person, so everything is open if you just look under my name. And my name of Mariam is very unique. Most people don't spell it this way.
Awesome. Thank you. What's with you right now, Zach?
I'm thinking about that little kid that I was, and how we're all in some ways that little kid just walking around in bigger bodies.
Pretending to be
What
grown-ups.
pretend some of us doing a better job than others.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience. I I think we focus a lot on, sometimes the tough stuff of the hurt child, or the broken child, or the not loved enough. And sometimes, what about the child the different parts of our childhood where our cups were full and we were having fun and we're like playing in the sandbox or we're at the beach or whatever we're doing. And I'm thinking about the power of humor. And that little kid that I was, using humor, using my kind of slapstick body to like make people laugh and soothe people's pain that had experienced, my grandma's family, they were all murdered. She had like 4 sisters, she had 2 parents, she had I saw a picture with 60 people that I had never met, taken a photograph. I don't know how it survived. This photograph taken before the war. And my dad showed it to me and he said, out of these 60 people, 4 people survived. Mm-hmm. And so the power of humor that I sought to diffuse and to make laugh, Paula, her name was Paula Vaga, Grandma Paula. And I was watching a Palestinian comedian named Sami Obed. And he said, well, I'm not a Zionist. In fact, I don't even know really what a Zionist is, but I saw that there's different types of Zionism. And right, he's using humor and he's saying, there's one form of Zionism, which is like, Jewish folks should have a safe place where they live and they feel comfortable. Okay, yeah, I could get behind that. And then there's like a second level of Zionism where it's like, and the state should be right in the Middle East, where Palestinian folks are living, but it's okay. You guys are going to figure it out. And then he looks at the screen. He's like, "Are we?" And then there's a third level of it, which is God told me that this is my land, and here's my like large weapon, and you got to deal with God. And it's like, that that's not good. And so I kind of think that joke is interesting because when we talk about these hard and fast things of, are you a Zionist or an anti-Zionist? There's so much more on that spectrum of, are you pro-Palestinian or do you hate the Palestinians? There's so much more beyond the binary when we listen to each other. Sometimes humor is appropriate, sometimes it's not. I mean, there's mass death and mass casualties. So I don't know about always using humor, but I'm trying to find places and spaces that are refilling my cup so that I can go out and do this work. Mm-hmm. Because if, my girlfriend is constantly doom scrolling and it's crushing her soul. And so I'm thinking about that. And I'm also thinking about the power that universities have to role model to our young folks that it's okay and it's beautiful to protest. And it's more than okay, it's beautiful to, like we were talking about in the beginning, to show emotions and to say 27 to 30,000, Gazan folks are killed, and we don't want anyone being killed, and there's 200 plus hostages, Israeli hostages. We don't want that either. And here are some steps forward about how to share power, to share land. And it breaks my heart when I see folks with I don't know, donors or board members that are silencing young people and doing the kind of the Neil McCarthy thing of saying, you are bad because you care about human rights. You are bad because you care about, we all care about human rights, and we need to be able to have this discussion, and we need to model it on college campuses, because if we can't model it on college campuses, how are we going to model it in the presidential debates, right, and in the law offices and the doctor's offices and churches, temples, masjids? That's what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. It reminded me of John Kabat-Zinn says, this is too serious a matter to take too seriously. And his point is not just that humor helps us with perspective, but also it helps us see possibilities we wouldn't see otherwise. And Mariam has talked about grace and openness to engaging with people, and I think humor can help us do that. Zack, where can people find you if they want to connect with you a little bit more?
Yeah. ZackRitter.net, ritter.zack@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Connect with me, bring Mariam and I, to your campus. And even if you disagree with the things that I'm saying, I want to hear from you, and I want to hold space. And it's through those tough conversations with people I deeply disagree with that I've learned more, and I've transformed my soul, as Gracie Lee Boggs would say. So I welcome everybody.
Yeah. And we're still learning. Thank you both. This has been terrific. I really appreciate the work that you've done, are doing, and will continue to do. I think this is so important for so many reasons, and beyond this moment, and will continue to be important. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks also to
Thank
our
you.
thanks also to our sponsors of today's episode, Routledge and Leadership. Routledge, Taylor and Francis is the world's leading academic publisher in education, publishing a wide range of books, journals, and other resources for practitioners, faculty, administrators, and researchers. They welcome Stylus Publishing to their publishing program and are thrilled to enrich their offerings in higher education, teaching, student affairs, professional development, assessment, and more. They're a proud sponsor of the podcast. You can view the complete catalog at routledge.com/education. And Leadership partners with colleges and universities to create transformational leadership experiences for students and professionals with a focus on creating a more just, caring, and thriving world. Leadership offers engaging learning experiences on courageous dialogue, integrity, equity, resilience, and community building. To find more about them, please visit leadership.org or connect with them on social. A huge shout out to our producer, Natalie Ambrosi, who does all the behind the scenes work to make us all look and sound good. We love the support for these conversations from our community. You can help us reach even more folks by subscribing to the podcast on YouTube and our weekly newsletter. If you're so inclined, you can leave us a 5-star review. It helps conversations like this, which are so important, reach a broader audience. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks again to both our fabulous guests today and to everyone who is watching and listening. Make it a great week. Thank you both.